Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta pressed Afghan President Hamid Karzai in a phone call yesterday to tighten up the vetting process for his military recruits, reflecting concerns over recent attacks by Afghan forces against U.S. and NATO troops. And there's new video of vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan heaping praise on the power of stimulus to create jobs when George W. Bush was president. We'll have that video exclusively later in the program. Right now, joining me today, we have Sam Seder, host of the daily podcast Majority Report, Maya Wiley, founder and president of the Center for Social Inclusion, a nonprofit that works to fight poverty, Judith Browne Dianis, co-director of the voting rights group The Advancement Project, and my colleague Ari Berman, political correspondent for The Nation magazine. Fantastic to have you all here this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
On Thursday, a new Boston Globe analysis showed Republican and independent registrations in toss-up states are far outpacing those of Democrats. And a new Suffolk University USA Today poll shows that a large number of people who are sympathetic to President Obama are also unlikely to vote for him. 43% of unregistered voters would vote for Obama compared to 14% for Romney. And 43% of registered but unlikely voters would vote for Obama compared to 20% for Romney, which is why the campaigns are engaged in a long, fierce battle in many states over just who gets to vote. Liberal groups are planning to appeal a judge's ruling Wednesday to let Pennsylvania's strict voter ID law take effect. That law could disenfranchise close to 760,000 Pennsylvania eligible voters who lack proper ID, or about 9% of the state's registered voters, according to Pennsylvania's Department of State and Department of Transportation. In Ohio, Republican Secretary of State John Husted canceled weekend voting statewide, something the state allowed in 2008, and then suspended two Democrats on a county election board after they voted to allow weekend voting. That's an amazing story that I want to get into because really fascinating. The Obama campaign has filed a lawsuit in federal court to restore voting on the 3 days before the election, and that is being dealt with right now. There are some good news for Democrats and voting rights groups in Florida, where a federal court rejected part of the state's new law that would have restricted the number of early voting days. The court said the new law cannot take effect in 5 counties covered by the Voting Rights Act because it would, quote, make it materially more difficult for some minority voters to cast a ballot. So this is happening. There's a variety of battles that are happening over this issue. Let's save Pennsylvania, because I think that's the headline of the week, and we also have Congressman Chaka Fattah, who's going to be joining us in a moment. I'm really interested in, so when you're dealing with voter ID laws, those have gotten the most attention, I think. I think it's fair to say in the press, right? Voter ID laws. And when you're dealing with voter ID laws, you have an argument on the other side of the voter ID equation, which is that there's this problem of voter fraud and voter impersonation. Now, every single empirical look at this shows it's just a non-issue. It's not a problem. But okay, so let's leave that aside. Then it turns out the same people pushing voter ID also happen to think we should shorten early voting. What is the argument there precisely?
Well, I'm
asking you an unfair question because you're on the other side of it. Well, is there an argument there?
Want me to make up one?
Please.
So if I were to make up one, some of the things that we've heard is that it costs too much to have weekend voting. In fact, most election officials like it because it spreads out all of the voters over a number of days so they don't get that Tuesday crunch. But Republican legislatures say, no, it costs too much. Let's shorten it. But then why shorten it and cut out that particular weekend that African-American churches on the Sunday do Souls to the Polls campaign, right? We know disproportionately African-Americans participate in early voting. In Florida in particular, they are more likely to vote on that last Sunday before Election Day. And the governor said when he signed the law, he said, I didn't even know that the black churches did that. But, all of the statistics show that African-Americans and Latinos disproportionately vote during early voting.
Yeah, and Chris, can I just say, there's really 4 principal ways that the right to vote has been restricted since the 2010 election. And it's restricting voter registration drives, it's cutting back on early voting, it's passing voter ID laws, and it's disenfranchising ex-felons. And there's different rationales for different things. For voter registration, it's ACORN. It's always a one-word answer from Republicans. For early voting, it's too expensive. For voter ID, that costs a lot of money, so you don't have the expensive argument, but you have the voter fraud argument, even though, as you mentioned earlier, it's a canard. And for ex-felons, felons, it's basically that they don't deserve to vote, that they committed a crime, and even though they paid their debt to society, they shouldn't be back in the political process. But if you look at all these different restrictions together, what you see is a trend. And the trend that you see is that the people that are most likely to be harmed by these restrictions are people that would have voted for Barack Obama in 2008. I mean, it's no coincidence. I keep saying this. It's no coincidence it happened in 2010.
Right. We should also add to your list the purges, right?
Yes,
absolutely. The Florida purge, which has now spread to 13 states, with that one being the underlying so-called reason is that we don't want non-citizens voting, even though they're, again, just like the fraud, there's really no evidence of that happening.
And make no mistake, this isn't something that's new to 2010. I mean, this has been something that has been going on. Republicans have said...
It's super old. I mean, I'm reading Eric Foner's book on Reconstruction. It goes back Ohio.
Of course. I mean, there's been an understanding that the less people who come out to vote, the more that it's going to benefit the Republican Party, frankly. Right. And so it's not, this is more of the same.
It's not different, it's not different, but it is broader and deeper and more wide scale. Actually, more wide scale than in a century. Right?
So this is really interesting to me. It seems to me that there's been a massive expansion of these kinds of activities at state level. And what is that about? Is that just because the 2010 brought a lot of Republican legislators to power?
Exactly. They're empowered to change the rules, right? So instead of having to do the way that it used to happen, which is through intimidation, last-minute misinformation, the robocalls, they now are in a position to change the rules of the game and really be able to stack the deck.
Well, and the 2008 election added momentum to Republicans needing to do this because they saw the coalition. Obama turned out the coalition of the ascendant, young voters, Hispanics, African Americans. They said, we can't let this happen again. So when they got in power in 2010, it was different than in years past, Sam, because they said, this has to be priority number one. We have to shape an electorate to our own favor because the demographics of the country are changing in ways that do not benefit us as a party.
I think we also have to get in here ALEC, because remember that these laws, in addition to there being different people in control of the rules, it also has been that there have been a specific nonprofit, in this case ALEC, that has pushed these laws across the state. So it's a combination of having the not-for-profit infrastructure that then supports the lawmakers who are there. And we actually have to think about how we do that to combat these.
I think it's interesting to think, what you see in this is that there's one, just take away the moral problem here, right, which is that the right to vote is a matter of human dignity, human rights, and self-determination. Fundamental democracy. Cornerstone democracy, self-determination. Just throw that out for a second, okay? And just talk about the raw politics, right? There's one political coalition in America. I mean, this is just a fact. I'm not. I think everyone would agree with it. One political coalition benefits from larger turnout. One benefits from smaller turnout. Right. Democrats benefit from larger turnout. Republicans. But what I think is so fascinating in this Ohio case is that when you had the individual county boards of elections, right, making county-by-county policy about early voting. And every county board of election has 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, if I'm not mistaken. Ari, you basically broke this story. This was groundbreaking reporting on your but I thought it was so interesting. In the counties that were very Republican, the county boards of elections were saying, hey, let's just keep stuff open, make it easy for people to vote. And the Democrats on the county board went along with it. Because as a matter of principle, they're pro that. In the counties that were heavily Democratic, the Republicans on those county boards said, nope, no, too expensive or whatever, and that's why we've had this impasse.
Yeah, and the backstory of this is that Ohio obviously had extremely long lines on Election Day 2004. Up to 3% of voters didn't vote. That was larger than the margin of victory that George W. Bush won the state. Ohio proved decisive in electing George W. Bush to a second term. So Ohio expanded early voting drastically in the 2008 election. A lot of people used it. It was very convenient. Then in 2010, when Republicans took over the legislature, they cut back on early voting drastically from 35 days to 11, and again banned it on the Sunday before the election. Then that was so unpopular that there was a huge drive to create a referendum on this law. It was subsequently repealed by the legislature. They repealed their own law, except they banned early voting still on 3 days before the election. So county boards had some discretion in terms of how they could implement the early voting hours now that the law was back in their hands. And then what happened is you saw this deadlocking. Republicans were never against early voting until it was something that Democrats started using. And even you look at these people that were suspended in Toledo on the Montgomery County Board of Elections, these Democrats who refused to crack down
along with it,
they were suspended. Those Republicans were for early early voting in 2011. They reversed this year. So there's so much inconsistency with the Republican position on early voting.
There's an Obama, the Obama campaign has sued on not just on, there's sort of two issues in Ohio. There's early voting and what that's going to look like before the 3 days before the election. Then there's the 3 days before the election, which has been taken out. I actually just note as a matter of disclosure, my wife is an ex-White House staffer. She's been doing some work with the campaign. So just so that's out there.
They wanted to equalize how early voting happened. So for military voters, but they wanted it to be for everybody.
Right.
I want to. We've been more or less cursing the darkness. So I want to sort of light a candle about what to be done. I mean, there's 80 days until the election, a little less. We're going to bring in Congressman Chaka Fattah and turn our attention to Pennsylvania. What to do if the case doesn't go the way that the Advancement Project wants it to go? Then what next? Right after this.